file item number 6, I believe, is here. Yeah, file item number 6, Senator Portantino, SB 325, looks like to me. 328? 328.
You sit over there? Okay.
You may proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Let me start by thanking the Chair and members of the committee for having multiple meetings with me and for taking this education policy proposal so seriously. It was very helpful. The best interest of our children is truly a nonpartisan interest, and the committee members approached it that way, and I'm also grateful for that. If I asked any of you a series of questions, and I think we would all end up with the same answers. Frankly, do you want to increase academic performance, attendance, and graduation rates, while at the same time helping our children be more healthy, less depressed, and decreases in car accidents? I believe every one of us would say yes. The implementation of Senate Bill 328 achieves these goals. It addresses the needs for California's middle and high school students to start the school day no earlier than 8:30. The vast majority of middle and high schools in California begin at times that are contrary to the sleep health needs and developmental norms of adolescents, and frankly start at a time that is actually detrimental to their health and welfare of our children. Compelling evidence shows that early middle and high school start times impede the sleep necessary for adolescents' growing bodies and brains and are out of sync with their biological clocks. Even more disturbingly, starting school at these hours has been linked not only to widespread sleep deprivation, but also to a wide range of physical, psychological, and educational problems. As you will hear later from Dr. Palaio, the circadian rhythm shift of adolescence makes it difficult for the vast majority of teens to fall asleep early. When this is combined with too early start times, the result is sleep deprivation. The single best way to address this has been shown repeatedly to adjust the start time to 8:30 a.m. or later. Currently, California has over 3 million high school and middle school students. The average school start time for these students is 8:07. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, it's not uncommon for secondary schools in our state to start first period around 7:30, and some schools start as early as 7. Prior to the 1970s, schools started between 8:30 and 9 a.m. These times gradually moved earlier, not because of student needs, but because of the efficiency and the hustle and bustle of life. This began before we knew about the harm these start times would do to our children. Since then, a large body of research has proven that insufficient sleep in teenage adolescents poses a public health risk and has had an adverse effect on academic success. Because of this, the nation's leading public health and medical groups all recommend that middle and high schools should start at 8:30 a.m. or later. These groups include the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychological Association. The California PTA, which I want to give big props to, supports SB 328 because it's the right thing to do for our children. The National PTA just adopted a resolution supporting the research behind late school start times. This is a movement where California should lead, and here's more reasons why. Large-scale longitudinal studies have shown that these healthy start times are linked to an increased attendance rate, test scores, graduation rates, student attention, and improved student and family interaction. Yes, we will get along better with our kids if they get to sleep more in the morning. Additionally, studies found decreases in disciplinary actions, another goal of this committee and other legislators. Students falling asleep in class and even teen-involved car crashes will go down, the #1 killer of teens in America. Drowsy teen drivers are public safety risk, and again, traffic accidents are the leading cause of death for teenagers in the United States. In a survey by AAA, 23% of licensed drivers aged 16 to 18 said they had driven at least once when they were so sleepy they had a tough time keeping their eyes open. The state of California sets standards for many aspects of the school system because we have compelling interest in protecting the health and safety of our state's children. Just as state policy now protects children from lead paint, smoking, and other health risks, it should protect children from the harmful health and safety effects of start times that are too early. When it comes to education matters, California has a long history of providing parameters within school districts may operate. Establishing a no earlier than start time is no different than setting a minimum number of hours per day of classroom time or minimum number of instructional hours. Under SB 328, school districts will continue to control their class schedule within the minimum healthy parameters in order to ensure that California's kids' health is not unintentionally harmed. Also, I'd like to note that zero period is not covered by SB 328, which means that schools will still be able to offer optional period classes. Given that the standard school day, meaning first period, would now start at 8:30 or later, zero period would also start at a correspondingly later time. So these students would also start their days later and get more sleep. With later start times, children from all types of families have higher attendance rates and do better in school, especially children of hard-working, lower-income families. Because of these parents' schedules, many children of working families must get to school on their own, often walking or riding bikes in the early morning darkness, which puts them at risk. And I want to take a special moment to focus on this point. It's very fair to ask and be concerned about the impact on working parents. And here's what we know. In speaking to representatives of communities that have gone to early start time, they take extra care to communicate and coordinate with these families. They shift afternoon resources which are no longer necessary to the morning, and the research and results show that before the shift, many of these students are the most sleep deprived at the start and actually see some of the greatest benefits from the move. In short, their health and performance shoots up. So although it's a legitimate concern, we know that cohort gets the biggest benefit, and we know communities take the greatest care to address those concerns. We also know that teens who work long hours to help support their families, they are big beneficiaries of the late start time, because it's not unusual for these students to have to work until 10 or 11 p.m., which makes it difficult for them to get enough sleep if they have to wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. to get to school. There is not and never will be one schedule that will be convenient for the limitless variety of work schedules, activities, preferences, and configurations of families. Just as there are teens who work until late at night, there are adults who do shift work or non-traditional hours. So when we talk about education reform, what better way to implement reform than by acting on what the data, research, and statistics prove to be beneficial to our children? This bill is not based on theory, where there is something good that might happen. It is based on research that has been followed across the country with tangible, measurable results. In addition, later start times will increase average daily attendance funding for districts because attendance goes up. The chief financial officer for the Los Angeles Unified School District has estimated that boosting attendance by 1% will bring an additional $40 million per year to that school. The Brookings Institute, because one thing you'll probably hear from the opposition is that this is going to cost money. Well, the Brookings Institute disputes that and has estimated that an overall benefit to cost ratio of 9 to 1 on that point. I would submit that the evidence of the 400 school districts around the country dispute the notion that this is going to cost extra money and it will be cost neutral at best. As you will hear, healthy school start times meet the needs of students across the board and all spectrums and demographics, from all socioeconomic families facing high levels of stress from demanding course loads, student athletes who are less likely to get injured, and teen drivers will also benefit. Start times are an equity issue equity issue and enacting later, healthier, safe, evidence-based school hours is a reform with a potential to improve the health, safety, and academic achievement of all students. The opponents of this bill would have you believe that the mental health, physical health, and safety needs of our state's 6 million public school children are less important than adult interests. I would say they are wrong. They will argue that local school boards, who I respect for their dedication and service, should make this decision, even if it is a decision that harms our children, not one that health professionals and pediatricians, and my friend Dr. Pan is going to say a few words, and science researchers who have been studying the issue for 20 years. So after Dr. Pan says something, my co-author, I have to testify Dr. Rafael Palaio from Stanford University School of Medicine, Lisa Lewis from a nonprofit, non-fiscally interested, just parents first, start school later, California, and Joy Wake from Parent Engagement Group. And I know the PTA is here to testify. I want to stay within the chair's parameters on time, but I know the PTA is also going to echo their strong support. So if you would indulge me to let Senator Pan say a few words and not count it towards my 4 minutes, I'd appreciate it.
I don't know. No, Dr. Pan, please proceed. What we'll do is we'll just give you 4 minutes, and they can split it up. But after 4 minutes, we will call
let me
it.
just
But
say
you're not on the time limit.
Okay. Well,
Okay,
let me just.
And
say,
he's a real doctor. So
there you go. Thank you. So Senator Thurmond, asked me to come here and take my senator hat on. He's already reviewed the research for you. You're going to hear from the testimony. The science is sound. We need to put our children first. And I think this is a very important bill based on the research that has been extensively, actually not just one study, numerous studies have demonstrated that this is going to have tremendous benefit to our middle and high school students. Actually, interestingly enough, elementary school students, which is why this bill doesn't address that, actually not as much of impact. So, in fact, a lot of school districts, what they do is just reverse the schedule, where sometimes they have the elementary school start later, and they're trying to figure out their busing routes and so forth. There are things school districts can do. The science is sound. We need to do this for the benefit of our kids. Thank you.
thank you. The witnesses. And so what we're going to do is 4 minutes for all of you, so you guys figure it out.
Good afternoon. I'm a professor and physician at Stanford University. I'm sorry, sir. Come on.
Oh, restart the clock.
Go ahead. Proceed.
Hi. Good afternoon. I'm a professor and physician at Stanford University. The evidence is clear and indisputable that adolescents are suffering from chronic sleep deprivation, which is causing them harm. Science teaches us adolescents are particularly vulnerable to sleep deprivation because there's a biological shift in their circadian rhythms that heightens their alertness at night, which forces them to fall asleep later. There are decades of peer-reviewed data showing that this is a worsening public health problem. The Center for Disease Control just reported that insufficient sleep among high school students has now increased to 73%. Unaware of this science, local schools started to move start times earlier. This has led to very serious physical and mental health problems, including decreased school performance, suicidal behavior, substance abuse, and car crashes. The good news is that research has consistently shown that delaying the school start time has improved health. The weight of the scientific evidence is so compelling that professional health societies have taken notice. The American Academy of Pediatrics, among several other organizations, have all agreed that starting school later will improve an adolescent's quality of life, academic performance, physical and mental health. Now, you have the opportunity to be the first state in the nation to translate this science into public health policy. I urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Start times are a statewide issue with statewide impacts. They affect health and safety. They're a social equity issue. They boost attendance, test scores, and graduation rates, and they have a tangible financial benefit. I'd like to quickly highlight these 4 areas. First, the state tracks student health with the California Healthy Kids Survey. The mental health results are troubling. The most recent survey found that 20% of 9th graders and 11th graders had considered suicide within the past year. Also, more than 1/4 of students said they felt chronically sad or hopeless. In addition to the health impacts already noted, there is a proven link between sleep deprivation, school start times, and teen hopelessness and suicidal ideation. Second, later start times are an equity issue, given that children of color and students from lower socioeconomic status families get less sleep than other students. This widens current academic gaps and future opportunity gaps. Third, when school starts later, attendance improves. Nearly 20% of 11th graders surveyed said that they had missed school in the past 30 days because they didn't get enough sleep. Fourth, later start times are linked to higher graduation rates, which are of statewide interest and are tracked annually. Later start times are one of the most cost-effective ways available to improve educational outcomes, equivalent to reducing class size by 1/3. Finally, many of our current schedules are legacy schedules, put in place before the overwhelming consensus about start times. As a mom, I hope you'll vote yes to protect the health of all of California's children. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Joy Wake with the High School Parent Engagement Group. All parents want our children to be healthy and to keep them safe. But without SB 328, millions of California children will continue to be forced by local school mandate to wake at a time that is proven to be unhealthy and unsafe. We parents encourage our kids to get to bed early, but we can't control their biology. The current situation just isn't working for most kids. This is a statewide public health issue, and it requires statewide action. Deferring to local control here would be misplaced and even dangerous. While our local school districts are accountable for a lot, they have no fiduciary duty for improving children's health outcomes. We should not leave public health decisions to a patchwork of 1,000 different local school districts who are not trained for making public health policy. We think all California children, especially those that are most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged, deserve equal protection from known health risks, not merely the 20% of middle and high school students who currently enjoy healthy start times. We understand that school administrators face many pressures and challenges, but hundreds of districts nationwide have proven that you don't need to harm teens' health and safety in order to administer an efficient school district or have thriving and successful athletes. Later you will hear that what the adult stakeholders in the system seem to think are more important than our children's health. Please vote yes on SB 328, or those administrative interests and adult preferences will continue to be prioritized over our children's health. Our children and families are asking for you to help us help our children.
Thank you. Well done. Very well done. We'll hear from the others in support. So you can come up to the microphone. You state your name, affiliation, if you're with a group, and your position on the bill only now. Only.
Carol Kosovar. I'm with the California State PTA, representing over 800,000 members in strong support of this bill.
I'm Catherine Porter, representing San Francisco Bay Area Physicians for Social Responsibility in support of this bill.
My name is Luke Delcourt. I attend Marilama High School, and I strongly support this bill.
I am Ben Porter, a student body officer at Marilama High School, and I am in support of this bill.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Enix. I'm the immediate past chair of the San Juan Unified School District Local Control Accountability Plan Parent Advisory Committee. I strongly support this measure.
Hi, Amy Kasuni, immediate past assistant chair of the Parent Advisory Committee for LCAP in the San Juan Unified School District in support.
Good afternoon. Damaris Canton, also a member of the San Juan Unified School District LCAP Committee in support.
Alex Zuko with the California State PTA and mom of 2 children in strong support.
Christy Lopez with the California State PTA in support.
My name is Deborah Otten. I'm a marriage family therapist, and I overwhelmingly support this.
I'm Tom Nelson. I am the current assistant chair to the Local Control Accountability Plan Committee for the San Juan School District, and I support this.
Tia Nguyen on behalf of Public Advocates, support.
Susan Gilling, San Juan Unified School District reading tutor. I strongly support this bill.
Stephanie Fredrickson, Parent Engagement Group, mother of 2 teens. I support.
Chris Streller. I am from San Juan Unified School District. I raised 3 kids in the school district. Served as a substitute teacher for 4 years with the high school and PTA president for 2 years. I am in support of this bill.
Barrett McEwen, parent of 2 graduates of the San Juan Unified School District in strong support.
Elizabeth McClure, OBGYN, parent of 3 students through San Juan Unified School District, strongly support.
Lori Baker, current president of the Rio Americano High School PTSA. I strongly support.
Good afternoon. Pamela Gibbs, representing the Los Angeles County Office of Education, in support.
I am Ward Wake. I support this bill.
Aiden Wake, and I also support this bill.
Kobe Pizzati, on behalf of myself as a Washington Unified School Board trustee, I'm also in support, but do believe this bill needs to be including of charter schools. Thank you.
I'm Cease Murphy from Shingle Springs, California. I'm the mother of 4 and grandmother of 7, and I strongly support this bill.
Hi, I'm Grant Webster. I attend Chapman University and previously went to Rio Americano, and I support this bill.
I'm Emma Thompson. I'm a graduate of a Bay Area high school, and I support this bill as well.
Suzanne McMurtry, and I'm the parent of 2 and the foster parent of another, and I strongly support this bill.
Laurel Hollis, parent of 2 San Juan alumni, and I support this bill.
I'm Jeremy Hollis. I'm a retired teacher, and I strongly support the bill.
Dr. Dean Blumberg, pediatrician in Sacramento, and I'm here on behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics in California, representing over 5,000 board-certified pediatricians in support. Thank you.
I'm Ann Delcor. I'm a member of the Superintendent Parent Advisory Committee in San Juan Unified School District in strong support.
My name is Audrey Lair, and I'm in the San Juan Unified School District, and I strongly support this bill.
My name is Juliet Delcor. I'm a student in the San Juan Unified School District, and I support this bill.
I'm Leah Sendler, an exhausted high school student, and I support this bill. I'm Kiani Landell. On behalf of fellow high school students dealing with mental illnesses, I strongly support this bill.
Hi, my name is Irina Keller. I'm a co-leader of the California chapter of Start School Later. I'm a parent of 2 adolescents. Sleep scientist, and a professor of child and adolescent developmental sciences. Clear. I strongly support this bill.
I am Suzanne Cook. I'm the current Rio Americano High School PTA parliamentarian. I'm a local business owner, mother of 3 San Juan Unified students, 2 who have been diagnosed with depression, 1 with severe depression. I strongly support this bill.
Seeing no further support, opposition, please come forward. Please make way for the opposition.
On behalf of the California School Boards Association, I'd first like to clarify that the question before you is not whether there's any benefit to later school start times. Let me repeat that. The question before you is not whether there is any benefit to later school start times. It is whether the state should determine the start time for over 3,000 secondary schools, irrespective of local circumstances and priorities. SB328 would preempt school districts from engaging students, parents, and employees in the discussion about what the appropriate start time is for their schools. Most of the schools in California that have way later start times have opted not to adopt them for a variety of reasons. I don't have time to get into all of the issues that were cited that I'd like to rebut, but let me name a couple. It's often said it's just very easy to flip or reverse your school schedule so that secondary school kids can start later, and within existing resources you can have your younger kids start earlier. When parents find out that the youngest children will be going to school, walking to school, waiting for the bus in the dark half of the year, it tends to be very unpopular. And that's the kind of decision that we like to make based on local input. Transportation funding. Some school districts say, I would like to pursue later start times, but unfortunately, I'd have to buy 9 additional buses to make this happen, and I don't have those resources. That's the kind of thing that we just can't know at the state level. I'm pleased that proponents have found some districts that were able to move to later start times and even accommodate working class students. There are underlying issues like uneven transportation funding, like geography, like different levels of socioeconomic issues that will affect whether a student can adopt this, whether a district can adopt this or not. So unfortunately, the examples that were cited are not representative of what would actually happen if this were a mandate across the entire state. The one-size-fits-all model is unlikely to result in more sleep for the majority of California students, and that's because most working parents are unable to delay the start of their workday. That'll result in parents, I'll wrap up, sir. That'll result in parents dropping off their kids at school early or making them, responsible for getting themselves to school, kids as young as 11. So it'll actually result in prolonging the school day for most of those kids. I'll give you just one example. Antelope Valley High School tried this,
Quickly.
had to reverse because attendance actually went down. So on behalf of the California school boards and the 14,000 school districts across the country that have opted not to do this, we respectfully ask for your no vote.
Thank you. Our next witness.
My name is Dr. Michael McKibben. I am the president of San Juan Unified School District School Board, also the parent of a recent graduate of San Juan. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is what we did this last spring was we approved moving our start times at our schools for the next 3 years for 5 minutes. The reason why we did that was because it is caused the least delay and the least issue for our parents, because we took a survey of our parents, and in fact 7,309 participants in the survey came back with very mixed feelings about school start times. Many of them thought that it was a good idea for kids to get more sleep, but on the other hand, they talked about different kinds of issues, and it was very much a mixed bag. So one of the things that we ask you to do is to trust the school districts in this state. We will get to later start times because the data are compelling. But the fact remains is that this is a one-size-fits-all solution. And indeed, what works for San Juan Unified will not work for the schools in Placer County. So the idea is, so we got very mixed results in terms of it absolutely allows for more sleep. But on the other hand, the issues related to homework, related to extracurricular activities, related to family time were some of the things that those 7,000 parents told us were difficult. There were a lot of issues and concerns raised by difficulties of working parents, and particularly those low-income working parents. It did not work the same way for wealthy parents as it did for poor parents, and so forth. So we had to take all of them into consideration. Transportation, labor contracts, special programs like the International Baccalaureate, and the requirement there be a seven-period day in their year. This setting an 8:30 start time is a capricious way to do it. Trust your school districts. We will get there, but we'll get there in our own way.
Thank you. Quickly.
Mr. Chair and members, Seth Bramble here on behalf of the California Teachers Association, respectfully in opposition. I do have 6 kids who like to wake up early in the morning, but I would just say there is nothing at all that is stopping a school district that wants to start after 8:30, start their high schools at 9 o'clock. There's nothing stopping them from doing that if that's what they determine they want to do. We urge your opposition.
Thank you.
Sarah Badgers with the California Association of Business School Officials, also in opposition for those statements articulated earlier. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll bring it back. Any other opposition? I apologize. Any other opposition? Seeing no opposition, we'll bring it back behind the room. I'll just share my thoughts. I sat down with the author, and I appreciate you coming to my office and sitting down with me. And I shared with you that I oppose this. I don't necessarily oppose starting the high school or secondary schools at a later time. That isn't my challenge with this. This is driving the school schedule from Sacramento is kind of problematic from my experience and my perception of the challenges schools faced. And why don't I just, maybe I could throw a question out to the School Boards Association or the CASBO folks. Typically a school district, if they have 24 schools, as I understand it, they'll have like 8 buses. They don't have 24 buses. So talk about the dynamics associated, the logistics associated with getting kids to school, and how, yes, the schools could start at 8:30. We could even have schools starting at 10 a.m. if we keep pushing this back, if I'm not correct.
I can address that. Certainly, yes. So that's a good example. If you had 8 schools, you might have, 24 schools, you might have 8 buses. You might have fewer, actually, than that. But the way it works currently is that you've got a broader span of time in order to make as many trips as you need to pick up and drop off all of those kids. There is a natural limit on the later side to how late you can start school. So if the earliest you can start is 8:30, you are compressing that period, which is currently, it's going to be at least a couple of hours that you can have your drivers going back and making trips because your start times are staggered. Under this bill, that period would be shorter, and that's where the need comes from to get additional buses, additional bus drivers, which of course are very hard to find these days. This may be something that you all know already, but transportation funding is very odd in this state. There was a base year that was set, and school districts all receive a proportion of that, irrespective to whether their population has grown or decreased since then. So some school districts will be able to cope with transportation demand increasing, and some will not. That's another local condition that varies greatly.
Great,
Mr. Chair,
and,
Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Quickly, if you want to finish my dialogue with her. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what we know from the 400 districts around the country that have done this, we have not seen an increase in cost, and we know that the districts that have changed their bus schedule to accommodate elementary, we know from factual that it doesn't.
I can't believe this wouldn't increase costs. I just can't believe that. That doesn't mean that it's not a good idea, though, right? Because I know you want to benefit kids, so I appreciate that. So in my experience, in my own neighborhood, right, and I'll use the word privilege, because it's an area where there's a decent amount of disposable income. Parents can set their schedules, their salespeople, jobs like that. They can set their schedules later in the day. But where I taught, parents didn't have the same privilege. They would have to get to work at 8 a.m., and that was it. It wasn't negotiable. So I don't see how this has kids waking up any later, because aren't they going to have to go into daycare before the school day starts? And I mean, do you see the shortening really? How does that increase the sleep time?
Well, that is our expectation, that, again, it would play out differently. In areas where parents do have the privilege of controlling their schedules, we do expect to see students potentially be able to sleep in later, although a lot of student groups had told me that they would probably shift student meetings to the morning, so that might be another factor. But certainly, when parents do not have that kind of control over their work schedule, it means that they either drop off their children at the time they do currently, which creates demand for us to create additional before-school programs. And respectfully, I disagree that it would be as simple as eliminating your after-school program and moving those resources to the beginning of the school day. I just don't believe it's that simple across the state. So we would need to, at minimum, create some supervision, but ideally create a before-school program, because we're talking about a significant amount of time that children would be there.
And again, existing law permits a school district to change the start time now. There's nothing that stops them from moving it back. Correct. And many school districts, like San Juan is a great example, they do want later start times, but for them later start times doesn't mean 8:30. They might be moving from 7:30 to 8:15, and that's what they can do within their existing resources. Great. And then one of the biggest challenge I expressed to you is the lack of flexibility in this approach, because I have a school district that actually starts a first period at 6:30. A couple days a week, and what are they? They're out surfing at 6:30 in the morning, because that's what we have in my community. And there may even be a crew that starts a first period earlier than 8:30, and you'll be precluded from doing that. Now the waves, aren't so great after 8:30. A little bit better at 6:30. I'm sure you're a surfer, Mr. Senator. You know this.
It would shock the chair to know that I actually have surfed.
I believe that.
I used to be called the Panther. I was so nimble.
I've seen those pictures. But again, the challenge that I really have with this is the lack of local flexibility to address your own community and geographic concerns. Is that a relevant question or a relevant thought?
Well, for school boards, local control is our bread and butter, and particularly the democracy that is intrinsic in that. So the prospect of losing the opportunity to do what San Juan did, to engage our parents, to engage our employees, and involve them all in the decision process is an important one. It would be a pretty critical loss. So that is one of our primary concerns with this bill.
So I live on the ocean. Others live in a very rural area, so they have to travel far distances. Yes, they may start later, but this also means they're going to be at the school much later in the day. They may be traversing through mountain passes, etc., in the dark. So there's some safety issues on the other end, I would argue, as well.
Mr.
Senator,
Chairman, if I could, I would love to respond. One of the things that the PTA appropriately asked about was the implementation, and that it is important for communities to have that conversation. And so working in concert with them, we've come up with, I think, are prudent additions to the bill that are in print as we speak. This doesn't take effect for 2 years, giving school districts the opportunity to work with their families. Second of all, we're going to be adding encouragement to have community dialogues, which is a best practice that we're going to encourage to in the next set of amendments. And then thirdly, what we know, let me finish. The administrators that I talked to, as I was doing my personal research and going around California and talking to administrators, it was actually at the request of school principals and superintendents who said to me, if you're going to do this, you must do it as a statewide approach. Because what happens is those schools that are following the science and the research and doing what is in the best interest of their children are facing a challenge with coordinating after-school programs. And so it was the administrators who said, please do this so everyone is coordinated on the same schedule. And that's why we've delayed the implementation for 2 years, precisely as a nod to local control. And again, all the bill says is no earlier than 8:30. Again, another nod to local control. So in implementation, we have tried to be as sensitive and pragmatic and intelligent about this with deference to local control, but setting a minimum standard based on science. And then we also know, again, that the concerns that are being addressed don't prove to be practical once it's done.
So what do you say to my earlier comment with regard to some of my local sports teams that require the water? And I'm sure, real quick, and there's probably other activities on farms that have to take place early in the morning. So they have to, start a couple times a week at 6:30, and then I think they start later other days. Yet this bill doesn't allow for that local flexibility. We wouldn't be able to have these team sports in the morning, which our kids love, which engage them in school, which keep them in school, which help them be successful academically and beyond.
And I have two actual answers to that. First of all, in my conversation with the school districts that I've talked to, most of those early sports things, and like in my daughter's school, the choir starts early. That's part of zero period, not first period.
Not in this case, though.
Well, I think that's one of the adjustments that school districts make. Again, we're silent on zero period.
They can't do these things.
And let me go to the second point. Yeah. What we also know from the 400 school districts that have done this, we know participation in those programs increases. So we know it doesn't hurt participation, it increases participation.
But you're not getting we won't have those programs because we can't.
They'll just shift to zero period, and we're silent on zero period.
No, how can you just say they're just going to shift? It's actually their first period class.
Well, that's where the local.
If you say they just label it zero period, you get zero period any point in the day at that point. I don't know that your bill addresses the issue that I bring up. I think that's my point. But you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that implementation time is always appreciated, but unfortunately there are some factors that we've already come up against that additional time won't change. For example, the American Academy of Pediatrics' own recommendation with respect to later start times immediately after that says, but local school boards have to take into consideration other factors like traffic patterns, and it lists other factors that may or may not make later start times feasible. And that's coming from the American Academy of Pediatrics itself. And, I don't know who the administrators are that helped inform the author, but, a few, or I don't know how many administrators making this recommendation, I don't know that that is the weight that this committee needs in order to make this a mandate on a statewide level, particularly when it's never been done on a statewide level anywhere else in the country. Lastly, with respect to schedules, there are many schedules that would not work. Block schedules are increasingly popular in secondary school, and those typically will have at least a couple days during the week that they're starting before 8:30, so none of those schedules would work under this bill.
Right, your point about block schedule is right on, because in Long Beach we have that dynamic where the kids go earlier and later some other days. Some days they might start at 10 a.m.
Mr. Chairman, one of my witnesses would like to...
My questions were for her, so let's... Mr. McCarty?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions I want to get to, following up on the Chair's questions, but overall I support this policy. I did have some questions early on. I sat with you, of course. I did the research. I listened to not only my senator, but my kid's pediatrician, who I value tremendously.
You're a smart man.
Yes.
He gives your kids shots.
Yes. They're vaccinated by Dr. Pan. They were. I think this is a good policy. There are some nuanced issues which I respect the opinions from the Education Coalition, from the practitioners. So I just wanted to follow up on that. Just I think that's something you could help clarify, not just today, but maybe in the bill, is this zero period, not just swimming and rowing, but here in Sacramento or down El Centro, if you're on the football team, it's really hot in August and September, and they have kids doing it earlier in the day. And so that's not a regular class.
Correct.
It's a zero period. So I know you talk about it here, but maybe somehow we could further clarify that so we don't have districts tripped up into trying to make sure that the regular school day is a time, whether it's 8:30, 8:15, whatever it is, and other programs that are important that people want to participate will be able to still exist, as the chair was concerned about rightfully.
And I agree with the question and the comment. And it was one of the things, again, working in concert with the PTA, that we sought to address with the amendments that were put into the bill after it was introduced. We think it's pretty clear that the school, under your scenario, would have the flexibility to do that because it is zero period, which is not being regulated by this bill at all. If you think we need further clarity on that point, I have no qualms with making that as clear as day. That if a school district has a voluntary or athletic program that they have to do as a zero period, that's not what this is about. This is about first period, starting no earlier than 8:30.
The regular school day. So maybe you could work with us and clarify if it goes to the appropriations.
I will try my best to make it as clear as possible.
And the other thing I wanted some clarity on is it was referenced by one of the speakers, my constituent from the Washington School District in West Sacramento, this notion that charter schools, which are 1 in 10 California kids, and their sleep patterns are probably the same as non-charter school kids. And so do you commit to specifying that this policy should be for all schools in California? Right now, the bill says all middle school and high school students. It's silent on that distinction. Are you okay clarifying?
I don't want to get cross commitments with Senate versus Assembly. The version of the language that we have in relation to how it defines schools was based on the recommendation and the conversation with the Senate Education Committee.
Well, that was then, this is now. So we're in the Assembly, and this is an important issue. So we would like to clarify. But as somebody who cares deeply about my word and reputation like we all do, I can't make that commitment. What I would commit to you is I would have both sides in the room having that conversation, but I'm not going to promise them one thing and you another thing. And did the Senate say they didn't want to specify that this applies to charters?
I knew this question was going to come up today, and I was trying to clarify that today. It was my understanding from my staff that it was a comment from the staff to leave the language the way it is, that it says all students. We're not carving anybody out, and we're not expressly making any distinction. So that was the commitment that was made on the definition of all students, and I just don't want to cross promise. I think that's a laudable goal of mine, and I think we should respect that. The bill right now does not specify anything about charter schools. It doesn't expressly exclude them, and it doesn't expressly include them. And so I think the beauty of this bill is its simple language. So I don't want to get into a cross purpose where I run south with folks who have one expectation over another. So I'm being as honest as I can with you.
If there is some...
Mr. McCarty, if I may,
Sure.
the committee consultants here, they're going to need to know as they process the bill and move it forward whether or not it applies to charter schools. The author stated he wants a consistent statewide policy for all schools, which
And that's
I
what
think,
the- that's what the bill
I think what he's
says.
saying is he wants to include them. It's a yes or no answer.
Well, I want to keep the language on that piece the way it's drafted right now because I don't want to go against an agreement that was made with the Senate Education Committee, and I know as a chair you would appreciate that.
Well, with all due respect, though, you're in the assembly now.
Yeah.
So it's a
I
different
understand
house.
that, but you know what? It's been my
It's just the
understanding.
way it is.
But it's my understanding when you give your word, whether it's in your house or whether it's in church or whether it's on the street. It's just the way I was brought up.
Mr. Chair, is that, many times the bill starts the Senate and amended over in the Assembly.
What I will
That's why we
commit
have
to
two
you
houses.
is that Mr. Allen and you and me can talk about that. I mean, I just don't want to get in a cross. My reputation matters.
No, I get that.
And-
So if Mr.
and I'm not,
Hold on a second. If the intent is that all students, I don't see the problem with clarifying what all students.
And what I'm saying to you is I'm happy to commit to you to put you, me, and Mr. Allen in a room to make sure that I don't cross-promise members because I think that's important. One of my fundamental problems with this business is people don't keep their word, and I try to keep my word.
Okay. So
and I'm not making a promise to you other than you, myself, and Mr. Allen can figure out if we've addressed it to your satisfaction or not.
I'm not concerned whether or not the Senate did it or Assembly. I'm concerned whether or not Ledge Council or others down the next few weeks question whether or not this locks in to make sure it's applicable to all students. And so if there is some doubt, uncertainty, do you commit to making sure that we tighten it up to make sure that your intent that it covers everybody is solid?
My commitment to you is that I will work in concert with you and the senators to make sure that we have language that is to endeavor to try to make it acceptable to both sides. But I'm not going to make a commitment to you that I don't know if they'll agree to deliver on. I think that's fair.
Fair enough. Thank you.
It would be easy. I would say it would be easy for me to just say yes and then take the consequences where they come. I don't play that game.
Was that a yes?
No.
Because this is the committee where everything is easy, right? So we just gave you the easy button.
But I hope the committee members appreciate the fact that I'm being straightforward and honest with you. I mean, that's the only way to be in this business. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just say at the outset, I like the brain research. I think it's very powerful. I think it's irrefutably good for young people. I do think that there are some sticky issues around implementation. I think we landed on one just now. I had a question for you about what you said about not being at cross purposes at your word. Just so I'm clear, did the Senate tell you not to say that you would extend the all to be explicit to also include charter schools?
Mr. Thurmond, after you and I spoke, I consulted with my staff who had that meeting. And it was my understanding that in the meeting that the Senate Education Committee staff wanted the language to stay with the definition that was current. And so that's what I'm trying to honor.
Got it. I don't need to be in it, but when you and Mr. McCarty get together and Mr. Allen, could you also include Mr. O'Donnell in the Assembly Education Committee? I do think that it's going to require some work to provide clarity. I really believe that at some point there will be a question of interpretation, and without clear language, there will be confusion. Right. And I'm not expressing a position one way or the other about longer school day or shorter school day. I actually like longer school days, and I know that some charters have a longer school day, but I think if we say it's going to be all schools, I think we should be clear, all schools, and make it explicit in language. So I hope that you will include the Senate Education Committee and that there needs to be clarity on this issue. Would you say a little bit more? There was an example, I think it was from CSBA, about something you and I talked a lot. I appreciate the meetings I was concerned about parents with hardship at school drop-off. I see all the time parents, because of their work pressures, they have to drop their kids off really early sometimes before the school opens. The school sort of does this and says, we don't really see you there sitting on the bench. I'm like, no, they're really sitting there on the bench, right? But because of their limitations and their ability to run morning programs, they essentially say, until the bell rings, you're not here, because they're trying to manage liability and other issues. And I think you've addressed it in general for middle school and high school students. But I think the folks from CSBA raised a good point about parents for whom they're transporting split grades of kids. And would you say more about that? It does seem like it can be an issue, and I think it's something we got to think about the implementation of this.
If I could give a brief answer, and then one of my witnesses, Mr. Thurmond, if we could hear from them as well.
Please. Yes, thank you.
What I can tell you is, number one, we're talking about high school students, and they happen to be older. We're not talking about first graders, because I think that is a different issue. Number two, we know that those students get the most benefit, and we know that the communities work closely with those parents to make accommodations. We also know that the savings on the back end typically get shifted to the morning, where many schools will open their library earlier or do other things, because they're saving an hour worth of after-school costs, which they then can shift to address those unique needs on the local level. And just the overall impact from the 400 schools, it's a valid question, but it hasn't proved to be the problem that people think. And if I could let my witness answer, that'd be great too.
Yes, thank you. My name is Joy Wake with the High School Parent Engagement Group. The working schedule families, the working schedules for families are at odds for just about every schedule that there is. There's no way you can get around it. We have schools in this district who start at 7, and it's inconvenient for those parents and all of them, and schools that start at 9. But the bottom line is that we know that the children of working families, the children of hardworking families who might be getting an hourly wage in restaurants or agricultural or retail, that those children actually benefit the most. Their attendance goes up, and their math scores go up almost double than their more advantaged counterparts. So as some parents have to struggle more in the morning and get help from their friends and community and carpools. Some parents have to struggle more in the afternoon to get help picking their kids up from school. Some parents have to struggle with both. But we're parents, and we gather around and we do it because we get stuff done and we multitask. And
sorry, you go.
That it works out in the best because all children benefit, particularly our most vulnerable, the ones you're concerned about.
You raise a great point, and it makes me think about two things. One, what can we do to learn from the other states about the implementation? These are not issues that need to be answered for the first time, right? Other states have had to go through this. Right. 2 years sounds like a lot, but we all know it really isn't in the scheme of things. And so while I support the policy, I think it's a smart policy. I think it's good for kids. I think we got to figure out how to implement it in a way that it doesn't become a disruption to what happens on school campuses and a disruption for student lives. I was intrigued by the issue of the surveying of the parents, and there were mixed results on how they felt about it. Actually, to the author, I'm thinking about would you approach a variation of that survey, meaning getting feedback from parents about what would be a hardship for them now before the 2-year cycle is up, so we get the ways to implement this that minimizes those hardships for our families.
And again, in working closely with the PTA, we are going to add, once it hopefully gets out of committee, suggestions on having those communications with the community. So we intend to do that because I agree with all of you. I mean, the education piece is extremely important. And so we're going to make suggestions on that. I'm trying to be respectful to local control, and I'm not saying you must do 4 charrettes, you must have 3 newsletters, but we're going to make a series of suggestions on community engagement and education, and I agree.
Well, I just think we should hear from those who are impacted. It was great to hear from, I appreciated how the one student characterized it, a tired student or exhausted student. Right. They're impacted, and we should hear from them.
Absolutely.
But I think we should also hear from families in a way that helps us be intentional about how something gets designed. I want to make sure that 0 period doesn't just become an end around.
Right.
I think if we talk about pushing the start time back and then saying, but you can have 0 period. It shouldn't just be an end around here. It should be intentional. I'm taking you at your word that you're going to work on these things in implementation and clarity on the charter school, and I'll make a motion to move. I'll move the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the author of the bill. I'll try and just go through this. I appreciate the time you spent with me, Senator, to try and understand this issue a bit more. I think the main issue, as you know from me, is around the concerns of low and moderate income families. I think your witness just did an exceptional job explaining, as you've educated me, that the beneficiaries or the biggest beneficiaries of this may be that particular demographic. I don't presume to understand that entirely and how that works out, but I think a lot of us in recent weeks and months have spent a lot of time defending science. Some of us have been out marching for science, and so when presented with science, I can't rightly have been marching in the streets of San Diego claiming that we need to back up the scientists to turn around and ignore this document that you gave me that's a heck of a lot of science, which, by the way, was not my favorite subject in school, but only for you, Senator, would I do all that reading. So I just feel like it would be inconsistent for me or for anyone else who has come to the defense of scientists to suddenly now ignore this bill or not support this bill. I think that would not be right. Additionally, I think I want to acknowledge the discussion of all the finer points that are here, and I would just say change is hard, and that's what we all do here, is we do change. And I would point out, if left to their own devices, I'm not sure every school district in this state would have rules protecting LGBTQ youth. I'm not sure that there would be fully inclusive programs for female athletes. I don't know that that would be the case if this was not suggested or recommended or mandated from Sacramento, and I happen to believe that people will adjust. Now, I realize that comes at a lot of disruption, but I think there was a lot of disruption when we got people off of farms and put them into factories. This will happen again, and quite honestly, I kind of question why we're not keeping the kids there longer. You know, if you want to make it easier for parents, it's probably better to have an 8 to 5 school day and allow them to be there all day, use the additional time to learn Mandarin or something. But my point is this. If the science is there and we believe that this is the right thing for the kids, then this extending moving the start time back by 23 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, it's 8:07 is the average start time in the state of California. We're talking about 8:30. This discussion for this item has probably tripled the length of the amount of time we're talking about in effect. So, you know, in the interest of advancing common sense in Sacramento, I'm happy to second the motion. And while the discussion has been made about low mod, a particular issue that you and I share in common, Senator Portantino, is the issue of mental health. And I don't feel like that issue has been aired enough in this hearing. Before the part of the public record, would you do me a service of talking a little bit more about the mental health component of this bill? That is particularly important for me.
Well, thank you for your comments, and I echo them, especially about following science. It's rare that we have an opportunity to not only see the science, but then see that that science has been proven out, and we do have it here. I think the mental health component is significant. The Psychological Society has gone into the families and has actually monitored the change in student and parent relationship and seen that it benefits. We know that sleep deprivation significantly increases the incidents where teenagers contemplate suicide. That's been measured and quantified, and we know that having that sleep in the morning will decrease the thoughts of suicide. We know that sleep deprivation leads to impulsive behavior, again, which also leads to suicide, and you and I, know that that's a very, very important subject for me personally. When you think about the number one killer of teens is car accidents in America, and the number 2 killer of teens is suicide. Anything we can do to address the depression rate and the incidences of suicide, and that's a deeply personal issue to me, and a goal of mine. Anything that we can do to address that, we should, and this does. We know that not only in the family, but the kids on the school site feel better about themselves, participate more, have less disruptive behavior. So the mental health, fundamentally, that's what this is. This is a public health issue that helps our teens be healthier, that leads to then better academic performance. And so thank you for the question, and it's very important to this.
Same here. Lastly, I would just say, Senator, that I've been impressed by the number of constituents that have contacted my office about this issue, and I would remark that this is relatively organic and grassroots, as opposed to what is often, I think, feels like push emails that people do 2 clicks and suddenly they've told me how they feel about this. I've been impressed by the number of people who visited me in my office to share that this is personally meaningful to them, so that's a part of my support. The last thing I would say is I'm comfortable with the language as it's currently drafted. I think all schools, it doesn't get any clearer than that. And all schools means public, charter, parochial, private, whatever you want it to be. I mean, it's pretty clear. And so I would say that before folks start monkeying around with the bill, part of the simplicity is being very clear to locals about what the expectation is. Making it more complicated, I think, actually it accrues to the concerns of the opponents who are here today. So thank you very much again. Happy to second the motion and looking forward to voting for it.
Yes, thank you. Senator, thank you very much for this bill. As you know, we had a conversation, and obviously this research concerning start time is kind of old research, as I told you before. When I was on the school board 20 years ago, I think it was, this information became apparent and became relevant to us and in discussion. And yet, at the same time, it's the kind of thing that's hard for people to take the bull by the horn and really implement it. And so I appreciate the fact that you have done that and you've stepped forward to do it. I do know that most folks in schools will say, if you're going to do it, do it. Don't ask us to be optional or whatever, because that's the hard part. The worst school board meeting I ever had in my life was around school start time. Those going late, those going early. This meeting went on forever, and there was no one satisfied in the end. Constant, whether it was early or late, there was somebody inconvenienced, somebody's job that didn't fit in, somebody's child care that didn't fit in. I mean, it didn't matter whether there was some going early, some going late. Everybody was unhappy. Everybody was complaining because change is hard and difficult, and it just happens. I mean, so it was really a chaotic meeting. We got it done, the changes we had to make. But I can remember that I thought to myself, wow, if somebody had just sent us a note saying this is when you start and this is when you end, it would have been wonderful. We'd have saved hours and hours of agony with folks complaining, and yet in the end, they all made it work. Kids still got to school when they should. This is extremely important, I think, because it focuses on the mental health as well as the academics of students. And we often spend a lot of time talking about what we know works, and yet we don't implement what works. Right. And that's what's important. And so I thank you for bringing this forward, very courageous on your part, knowing that this is a subject that has, some detractors and supporters. But I'm very impressed with the young people who came and the parents who came, who basically wanted to say, this is in the best interest of children for their physical health as well as their mental health and for their academic growth. So I appreciate it, and I'll be supporting the bill. I know it will not be easy to implement, but you've given 2 years to do it. You've also put in a waiver for some individuals to do, and I think in the end, schools will realize that starting at 8:30 is not the worst thing in the world. And I know for teenagers, they'll be dancing in the streets of California.
Well, let's not hope they're dancing in the streets.
They'll be dancing in the streets before they go to school. Thanking you for letting them sleep a little bit longer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Member.
Mr. Kiley.
Good afternoon, Senator. I've very much appreciated the conversations that we've had on this bill, and I want to just start off by applauding you on 2 levels. First, for the clear earnestness and passion and dedication that you've brought to this whole subject matter, and I think it speaks very well of your caliber as a legislator. And then, secondly, for your commitment to data-based legislating. I've certainly, in my brief time in the legislature, heard a lot of bills that are based upon anecdotes at best, and this is based on what seems to be pretty solid data. And I think, based upon my review of the voluminous materials you've given me, that the brain science is pretty compelling. So one question I had is, I have from one of your articles here, I think this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It says that over the last 15 years, a small but growing number of school districts have responded to recent research reports regarding insufficient sleep among middle and high school students by delaying school start times. But I guess we're not going fast enough, to your satisfaction. Do you think there are structural impediments that exist at the district level towards implementing this? Is there an insufficient awareness of the data? You did mention one about syncing up extracurriculars, but what's stopping districts from doing this?
I think, frankly, there's two biggest hindrances. I think it's hard to institute change. That's one. And number two, I know a district that just shifted to it, and they've had to change their entire school day to accommodate the athletes so they don't miss academic time, because all of the other school districts around them are not changing their schedule. And so that's why the statewide mandate makes sense, to put everybody on the same playing field, but to also give a nod to local control to implement all of the logistics involved. So I don't know if you guys want to add another piece of why some schools don't do it.
I'd like to just quickly say that there are just a lot of structural, there are agreements with different bargaining groups, so it can be structurally sometimes more difficult to make the changes. But more than anything else is that they don't have to.
Right. That's
the main thing. They don't have to, and so when they don't have to, the kids' health tends to get put down at the bottom of the list, and these very important administrative concerns, those tend to go to the top of the list.
Yeah.
This may be a little more finely grained than you can answer off the top of your head, but if it is the sort of collective action problem that you described, then you might expect to see when adoption has occurred that it'd sort of be in clusters. Has that happened, or do you have any information on that?
I think school districts talk to each other, but again, not all being on the same page, not all following the same best practices. It's usually one goes first, and then others will follow.
I see.
And there are, 400 school districts around the country, Seattle being the largest. Davis is going to it, being another large district. I think that's what it is. It's one goes, sees the benefit. I know one school district went to a Wednesday late start, and it was so everybody observed in that school district that Wednesday was the best day. The kids' test scores were the best. The kids behaved the best. And so that school district the very next year said, you know what, we're going to go to a 5-day late start. So it's one of those things where typically the football coaches are the biggest opponents of this. And then after it's done in those schools, they come to the administrators and say, my practices are better. Why didn't we do this earlier? So it's just one of those things where the success of it builds success.
There's also in this article on the Start School Later group, it says that private schools rarely start earlier than 8 a.m. So I guess do you have any sense of why that's the case, that private schools tend to start later than public schools now?
I believe that it's because the pressure that transportation departments are on in the big school districts over time, the transportation departments are asked to do so much more with so fewer resources that they have to run more tiers and buses. Private schools don't have that. They don't, so they can just start whenever they want.
Right, most of their parents drop them off.
Got it. I guess my biggest issue with the bill is, the data when it comes to academic performance, physical and mental health, attendance seems pretty convincing. Some of the studies relating to community impacts, there's perhaps some selection bias, because when you're talking about a community that's made a decision to go to later start times, that might reflect the fact that you're looking at a community that is well suited for later start times. But some of the school districts in my area have had pretty extensive engagement with stakeholders around this issue, and so I guess the way the argument for this bill has been put forward is the brain science shows improved academic performance and physical and mental health. Therefore, we should delay school start times without considering whether there are countervailing considerations that also might relate to academic performance and physical and mental health and other factors. So, some of them were mentioned in the testimony. In fact, San Juan is part of my district. But, lost classroom time for athletes, less family time, less time for students to work after school, special ed busing supervision being extended, eliminates elementary early academic interventions. So I guess I'm just wondering how this bill weighs those factors and how it can presume to do so for the diversity of communities that we have around the state.
And I'll give you two answers. From the districts around the country, we have urban, we have suburban, we have rural districts in Utah, we have districts in Texas, we have in Minneapolis, we have one comparative study of a urban district with lots of socioeconomic differences next to a suburban district with lots of socioeconomic advantages. And all of those benefits have been categorized, calculated, and proven to be what we said. Now, again, you take a suburban district with a 98% graduation rate, their graduation rate isn't going to increase, but their depression goes down, their obesity goes down, their drug use goes down, their sexual activity goes down. You take a district that has a 40% graduation rate, you're going to see that graduation rate spike. District in Texas saw an 11% increase. So what I would say to you is we have the comparative data across the socioeconomic strata, big districts, little districts, and it's all been consistent and all been compelling. And so that's what I would say, to that. And then finally, and I don't know if it was the CDC study, but one of the studies had a conclusion by the lead researcher who said, we understand that there's going to be logistical challenges. We understand that there's going to be parent objections to this or adult arguments. But the overriding significant benefit to the student outweighs those inconveniences to the adult. And that was the conclusion of the researcher. And Lisa can jump in too.
Just a couple of other things. The first is that the lead author of the American Academy of Pediatrics statement, Dr. Judith Owens, she's actually said that to continue to do nothing is to continue to do harm. And also, a lot of this research has come out relatively recently. There have been studies over decades, but as far as the official recommendations, it was 2014 the American Academy of Pediatrics made their recommendations. It was 2015 that the CDC followed along with those recommendations. 2016, the American Medical Association. Then we have the American Psychological Association. So there really is a critical mass now of not just evidence, but also official recommendations, because this is a public health issue. When the CDC weighs in on this, they're doing that because of the overwhelming health issues that they see. And I'd also like to address very quickly, you mentioned about athletes. And I know about this. My son plays football, so he's a scholar athlete. And change is hard. But there are also a lot of other arguments in favor of later start times for athletes. Student athletes who get 8 hours of sleep or more are less likely to get injured. Those who didn't hit that critical 8-hour threshold were 2/3 more likely to get injured. And teams at the college level and even at the pro level now recognize that sleep is a competitive advantage. The Seattle Seahawks, there was a front page article about them in the New York Times a few months back about how they see sleep as a competitive advantage. Because we know that if you're sleep deprived, it affects your response time. It affects how well you perform out there on the field. And you're more likely to get injured. And also for those school athletes, they have to hit a minimum GPA in order to stay eligible. Well, if they're getting enough sleep, that is a positive benefit for their GPA, which means they're actually more likely to be able to continue to play.
Ms. Espinosa, I believe you wish to weigh in.
But just brief point of clarification. I believe the statement was made that the bill only affects high school. The language of the bill actually says
more than high school. High school and middle school.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that the language of the bill says secondary. So middle school, we are talking kids as young as 11. Again, it's not CSBA's will to take on the scientific discussion because school boards routinely weigh scientific evidence when deciding about interventions across the board. Scientific evidence and data about the particular needs of our community. So I would like to know, as a school board member, I'm sure Mr. McKibben would, whether later start times are a bigger impediment to the academic achievement or attendance of my students than a lack of safe routes to school, than hunger, than housing instability, things of that nature. So again, I want to go back to my first point. The issue isn't whether there is any benefit to this anywhere. It's the fact that the degree to which this is a benefit varies across communities. Without making any effort to refute any of the science, there was one 2007 Harvard study sent to me which very conclusively says it is not late school start times. It is actually the artificial light emitted by electronic devices that is messing up the circadian rhythm of adolescence. And that's from this year. And I submit that only as an example that if we were to look beyond a collection of studies that is meant to support only one conclusion, we might find something different. And that's why we're here in the Education Committee and not the Health Committee, which is why the folks that you entrust across 1,000 school boards across the state routinely weigh this kind of evidence. And just to close, that we understand that the whole child is very important. So we weigh all of those factors, and we weigh them on a daily basis because they are critical to the education of our students. So sleep, like all of the other health-related factors we deal with, is very important. And reiterate, we ask for your no vote.
Great, thank you. Maybe we should have a law that parents put their children to bed at 10 o'clock. Maybe that would be better.
We're taking devices away from them.
Yeah, that was all my questions, Mr. Chair. I did just want to say that while unfortunately I'm not going to be able to support the bill today, I wanted to thank the author. And, I do think whether this becomes law or not, you've done a great service with the attention you've brought to the issue.
Great. Thank you. Seeing no further comment, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and thank you for a robust, I think, excellent conversation. It's not often that we have so much information about the potential future impacts of our decisions at a time we make them. Here we do. We know that depression and the alarming consequences of that depression decrease when we move to a late start. And we know our children will perform better. Every one of us has at one point in time said, I'd like to find a way to help our students achieve better grades and be healthier. Here's our chance. We know that academic performance, attendance, and graduation rates go up, and we know our children's health increases with a late start time. I would respectfully submit that as legislators, it is very important that we not just consider these facts when we make our decision, but we use them to actively justify and promote that decision. As a dad, I know that my duty doesn't stop with my own daughters at my front door. I have a duty to protect the interests of every child every way that I can. I respectfully ask that you put the interests of California's 6 million children first and join me, Dr. Pan, and a host of academic and research experts that back up the results and vote yes on SB 328. And thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded, and per Mr. Thurmond, it does include charters. Please call the roll.
The motion
that motion does include charters.
The motion is due pass to appropriations. O'Donnell? No. O'Donnell, no. Chávez? Gloria? Aye. Gloria, aye. Kiley? No. Kiley, no. McCarty? Thurmond? Thurmond, aye. Weber? Aye. Weber, aye. So there's...
You'll hold it open for Mr. Chávez and Mr. McCarty?
Okay, 3-2, the bill is on call.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. One of our more robust discussions. I won't say it put me to sleep because that would be... It didn't put me to sleep. That was a joke, okay?